Laura, you've done a lot of work on juries, and I think up until this point in time, you might not have been willing to concede that we have to go national.
Right, right.
So I see this as kind of an
Right.
evolution in your thinking, and you have this idea of national juries. How did you come up with that?
Well, I've been thinking about juries for a long time and their relationship to the communities from which they're drawn, and whether we should be thinking about matching litigation to the community, because there's, we have this constitutional notion of a fair cross-section of the community is what makes up the jury, right?
Yeah.
So there's all this literature about what is a fair cross-section, and there's quite a bit of jurisprudence about that as well, but not much about what's the relevant community. If in fact we're going to have centralized national cases, then the concern is that either the jury will just be a casualty of that process,
right,
which to me is worst case scenario, or that you'll have some local jury deciding cases of national scope and thereby reducing the legitimacy of the verdicts. So it actually came from great discussions that we have in a class I do here called complex litigation, or as Kurt likes to call it, monster cases.
Yes, right.
we should rename it as monster cases.
Students would get more students.
That's
more
right.
Students,
So the intrepid souls who take this class are amazing, amazing students, and we have great discussions. And in the last 2 years that I've taught it, we talked about things, like just throwing out ideas. Well, what if we made the jury national? Would that change the way that we think about the legitimacy of a verdict in a national case?
Well, you know, I think it's part of our tradition that juries are supposed to come from our local community. People are kind of used to that. Do you think the average person who files a lawsuit would feel comfortable with a jury coming from all over the country to decide their case?
That's a great point, and of course this won't be for every case. It's only for the special case that can truly be described as national in scope. But the local plaintiff that you describe has already, sadly maybe, lost control of that case. If it really is part of some juggernaut of litigation, if you think about Vioxx or Firestone Tires, just as examples, right? They may have filed their local case down at the county courthouse, but it's probably been removed to federal court, then sent by a device called multi-district litigation to some centralized federal court. Some judge is going to hear the case consolidated with other cases like it from around the country. Then it gets swept up into some massive class action. So the local plaintiff has really lost control anyway.
What's your ideal situation of a case where this would be the perfect application?
Well, Vioxx would be a good example. I mean, many of these cases
But what makes the
settle,
Vioxx case something that is good for a national jury?
Because the issues that repeat from case to case to case in Vioxx are going to be pretty much the same when you think about, although there are individual differences in people's medical experiences and in the way damages might be calculated. But as to issues like, is asbestos an unreasonably dangerous product? Is Vioxx unreasonably dangerous under the restatement definition of that for strict liability and so on? Those sorts of cases are likely to be consistent from case to case. And one of the big concerns that drives innovation in complex litigation is that you get inconsistent outcomes on the same issue when you have localized litigation about this. So, you know, that ship has left port. The idea that we would keep all these cases local is just not happening. What is happening is that the cases are being centralized through a variety of procedural devices already. So it's not as though this idea of national juries is going to drive the centralization of cases. It's the other way around. The centralization of cases is happening already. So how should that affect the way the jury's constituted?
And on the other side of the coin, what kind of federal cases remain good cases for local juries? Any?
Oh, all kinds of. Civil rights cases probably, you know, but not necessarily actually. Some civil rights cases might be appropriate. I thought of it from the perspective of the procedural aggregation devices that are both currently in place and that are being pushed for in various reform efforts as driving the decision about whether a case is appropriate for a national jury.
Your earlier article about criminal
Right.
juries, where you need to have some regional input.
Absolutely.
To not
Which is
lose
why
it.
I think I can put these out without feeling as though I've contradicted myself. I think they're consistent, and here's the overarching idea that ties them together. The scope of the litigation ought to be tied to the jury veneer pool, right? So that the relevant community gets to have its say in the decision of the case, depending on the scope of the case.
You say in the article, you say that the community that will feel the impact of the jury's determination, that should govern from whence the jury comes.
They should be represented.
Exactly, exactly.
One of the things I thought about, Laura, though, is that when you aggregate, when you mix people together from disparate places around the country, it seems to me you run the possibility of having a jury that represents no community. It's just sort of a diluted amalgam. You know, what is
like the national election?
Like, well, yeah, I suppose. Right? Interesting that you should bring that up. But you know, that's one of the issues that we, in the area where I write a little bit about political philosophy. Is when do groups matter? How do you figure out what the group is? How do you figure out what the group personality is? So you're kind of saying there's a national American community? Sort of?
Well, yeah, for a case that's truly national in scope. And the casualty of that is going to be the local, the local plaintiff story. Again, I think for some kinds of cases, that local value system is going to be important. But I'm not sure, if you think about asbestos.
Yeah.
And some of this is driven strictly also by efficiency concerns, right? I mean, if it's not going to be possible for each person to get their full-scale local value judgment about, you know, whether asbestos is an unreasonably dangerous product. In other words, we're going to have to centralize this for reasons of efficiency.
Yeah.
How can we make the jury match what we're trying to do procedurally? The idea of citizen participation in the civil justice system, I think, is something that's pretty special about our system, and it is going away.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping this is one way, as Akhil Amar has a wonderful phrase. He says we have to think about creative accommodations, right, that make the jury feasible given modern litigation, and that's what I'm hoping this might be.